Medicine During the American Revolution, Episode 1. If I asked you what you knew about medicine during the American Revolution, what would you say? I would suspect many of you would respond with phrases such as, "It was so barbaric." "Was there any anesthesia?" "How did you sterilize your instruments?" "Did you give patients whiskey to help them pass out before surgery?" "I'm sure you give the patient a bullet to bite on." You know, I once heard doctors actually bled George Washington to death. Well, compared to medicine today, treatments and remedies do seem pretty horrific, don't they? But listen to the words of Dr. John Jones, professor of surgery at King's College in New York, which is modern-day Columbia, and the writer of the very first American medical textbook. Plain, concise, practical remarks on the treatment of wounds and fractures. If any of you, by observing the following rules, should save a life or even a limb of but one citizen who has bravely exposed himself in defense of his country, I shall think myself richly rewarded for my labor. You see, no matter what we think about the practice of medicine during the latter half of the 18th century, the practitioners truly wanted to heal their fellow man. Welcome to the world of medicine during the American Revolution. I'm Chris Grimes, and I'm going to be your guide on this journey. Beginning today and during our future visits together, we're going to explore a myriad of medical topics and debunk a few misconceptions along the way. 18th century medicine was in flux by the time the Revolution started. It was the age of enlightenment. Everything was being viewed differently. The concept of balancing the humors was being replaced by ideas such as overstimulation of the body, inflammation, and the miasmas. Treatments weren't necessarily changing. The medicines pretty much remained the same. The reasons for the treatments and the therapies were changing. Bleeding and purging were still being done. Tincture of rhubarb, syrup of ipecac, well, they were still making you vomit, and a good warm saltwater enema would have you relieving your bowels in an instant. As for surgery, well, the techniques and instruments were pretty much the same going back hundreds of years. The medical field was made up of three primary medical professionals: physicians, surgeons, and apothecaries. Physicians were the only ones to actually earn a diploma from one of the great universities of Europe or the British Isles. They took standard liberal arts classes such as Latin and philosophy, with a bit of mathematics and chemistry. They sat for oral examinations or they wrote dissertations to receive their degrees. Physicians did study anatomy at night in classes taught in the home of practicing physicians and surgeons. They also worked with some of these same professionals in the hospitals found in the hubs of medical learning, such as London, Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Paris. Physicians were the only medical professionals of the period to be called doctor. Next, there are the surgeons. These gentlemen were apprentice trained, serving as much as 8 years with another surgeon. You'd find them working in the local hospitals as dressers or in other capacities while serving under a senior surgeon. At night, they would have attended the same anatomy classes as the physicians, where they learned all about the human body. Oh, and make sure you never call them doctor. The tradition still holds true today, even in the British Isles, that a surgeon would be only referred to as Mr., or, in the case of the 21st century, Ms. And then lastly, there were the apothecaries. Well, these apprentices were tied to practicing apothecaries, helping them in their shops prepare all sorts of compounds, including tinctures and ointments and pills, suppositories, concoctions, and infusions. Not only were they prepping these medicines and cleaning the shops and running errands for their master, well, they were also learning about the business of operating a shop. They were also learning about his other inventory he was selling, spices and perfumes and makeup. You know, 18th century apothecary shops, if we could travel back in time, would probably remind us a lot of a modern day Walgreens. Oh, let's not forget these apprentices were also learning how to bleed clients, use cupping glasses, and extract teeth. In Europe and the British Isles, there was a distinct lines, and everybody tried to stay in their lane, with physicians and pretty much diagnosing and prescribing, never getting their hands dirty. In fact, they did quite a bit of this diagnosing and prescribing by correspondence. Surgeons, well, they were doing the manual things, like surgery, bleeding, dental work, bone setting. And then you had your apothecaries, and they were making their medicines while doing a bit of bleeding and tooth extractions too. However, they did cross over into each other's circles of operation on occasion. In fact, a quick examination of the local newspapers in London, and you'd find physicians suing surgeons and apothecaries for doing more than physical treatments, but actually acting as physicians. In America, things were a bit different. Population was much less dense, thus not providing a good income to a physician. Physicians had to learn how to do all three or partner with a surgeon or an apothecary to open a shop. A good example of the latter situation is the Pasteur and Gault Apothecary in Williamsburg, Virginia. Dr. William Pasteur was the physician and Mr. John Gault was the surgeon. Alexander Gaston of Newbern was doing all three. In fact, there was a time he overordered certain of the medicines and advertised them for sale in the local paper. As for training and education in the fledgling United States, apprentices were pretty much the norm, coupled with the education provided by America's two growing medical schools. Of course, we talked about the one in King's College, which is now Columbia, and then the other one in Philadelphia, which is now the University of Pennsylvania. But for those who could afford to travel overseas, they gained a huge amount of training sitting at the masters who were rewriting the textbooks there in the centers of medical learning. So in future episodes, we're going to explore some of the very medical professionals of the teaching centers in Scotland and England that shaped medicine of the day. Men like William Cullen, Percival Pott, the Hunter brothers, William and John. John's my personal favorite. But then we'll also take a look at some of their students who returned to America, like John Jones, Hugh Williamson, Benjamin Rush, John Morgan, and William Shippen Jr., who came home to practice and to teach right here in the States. Oh, and let's not forget practicing medicine during this conflict. We're going to explore the diseases and the wounds and their treatments. We're going to talk about malaria. We're going to talk about typhus and typhoid fever. So, stay tuned for more medicine during the American Revolution.